Today we are in Psalm 63. Now here's the thing, I have various commentators who I read about the Psalms every day. Here's one by a man called Kidner, very popular this one. A lovely one, this one by two guys called Brueggemann and Bellinger, two very good writers there. And they help me think about the Psalms each day. But one thing with Psalm 63, you can tell that when you read them, they really love it. Psalm 63, of all the Psalms, seems to be a very, very popular one. So it's a beautiful, beautiful Psalm this morning. So sit back and enjoy Psalm 63. O God, you're my God, I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there's no water. So I have looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and glory, because your steadfast love is better than life. My lips will praise you. So I will bless you as long as I live. I will lift up my hands and call on your name. My soul is satisfied as with a rich feast, and my mouth praises you with joyful lips when I think of you on my bed and meditate on you in the watches of the night. For you have been my help, and in the shadow of your wings I sing for joy. My soul clings to you, your right hand upholds me. But those who seek to destroy my life shall go down to the depths of the earth. They shall be given over to the power of the sword. They shall be a prey for jackals. But the king shall rejoice in God. All who swear by him shall exult. For the mouths of liars will be stopped. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, firstly, the context of this. It says in the text at the beginning, when he was in the wilderness of Judah, that he's probably, after he became king, there was an attempted coup by actually a son of his called Absalom, and David had to take to the wilderness, take to the desert for a while for safety, and I just thought that was the context. So it's a time when David was fleeing from one of his enemies, had to flee for safety to keep himself alive, basically during an attempted coup. The structure of the psalm is basically in two bits. There's verses 1 to 8, and there's verses 9 to 11. Verses 1 to 8 is a beautiful prayer, a lovely prayer to God. And verses 9 to 11, it kind of says, and by the way, can you get rid of my enemies as well while you're at it, type of thing. So you've got 1 to 8 is kind of this beautiful prayer, and then 9 to 11 is all about asking God to sort his enemies out for him, which is fine. But the thing that comes through this psalm, loud and clear, all the way through, is that David clearly had walked and lived very, very closely with God. For David, God was not something or not somebody or whatever who was like a long way away and distant and remote. David clearly had a very intimate and a very close relationship with God. I think I told you before, there used to be an Archbishop of Canterbury back in the 60s, 70s by the name of Michael Ramsey. And some people agree with him, some people passionately disagree with him. But everyone says the same thing about Michael Ramsey. Whether you agree with him or not, he walked closely with God. And David clearly did here. David was somebody who, obviously through all the changes and chances, the dangers and the troubles he encountered, David was clearly somebody who lived and walked very, very closely with God. And the intimacy that David has with God comes through this loud and clear. So from the beginning, he says, God, you are my God. You know, you are. And there's something here. You know, so he addresses God. You are my God. You know, I'm with you. You are mine, and I'm yours. You know, and there's a very strong sense here of intimacy. You are my God, not just the God of the past. That's important that be. Not just the God of the nation, but you are my God. I am walking and I'm living very, very closely with you, God. He's saying. So he starts from the very beginning. God, you are my God, and it's very important. It's very personal, very intimate there. I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. And so, you know how it's like when you're very, very thirsty, you get parched and you're desperate for a drink. Take it further. What does he say? My flesh faints for you. It's like pieces of people dying of thirst in the desert, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. So imagine those old films of people who try to get across the desert and being parched with thirst. And he's saying, that's how I feel towards God. You know, I long for God in the same way that a really, really thirsty person in the desert gasps for water. Again, you can see it. He's saying, you are my God. But he eagerly wants God as well, you know. God's not just there, but he really feels desperately in need of God. He needs God with him, you know. And the language is very strong in it, as in a dry and thirsty land where there is no water. So as a parched for thirst person hungers for water, so he's saying he's hungering after God. Then he goes on to say, I have looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and your glory. In other words, in all that's going on, he takes refuge in the sanctuary, the temple, that kind of in the tent, and he goes like going into church, and when he's there, he beholds God's power and God's glory, and he feeds on the power and the glory of God. And I think we need to remember that as well, really, the importance of remembering just how big and how glorious God is. I think in some ways in recent times we've tended to we've almost made God too personal in a funny kind of way. We forget just how big God is. So it's David saying, you are my God, and I thirst for you. But also I love to see again, reminded of your power and your glory. Okay. And then he goes on to say something even stronger, because your steadfast love is better than life. So he really enjoys God's love. And he says, your love, he says, is better even than life itself. So far David is saying here that God is my God, okay? And that he's thirsty for God in the same way that you might be thirsty in the desert. Then he enjoys in the temple God's power and God's glory. Remember just how big God is, but also remembering that God loves him, and that steadfast love of God is even better than life itself. And so, because he's my God, because he's thirsty for God, because he can remember and enjoy God's power and God's glory, because he knows he's in the shadow of God's love, he then talks about how he will bless his God as long as he lives. He lifts up my hands and calls on your name. So it says, my lips will praise you. I will bless you. I lift up my hands. And this is the sign of really intense worship, that he's extolling God with his mouth. He's praising God with his mouth, but he's also lifting his hands as well. And so showing with his mind and with his body and everything, he's expressing his love and his joy in God. And then he goes on to say that because he has God's love and because he's under God's protection and so on, he feels satisfied as with a rich feast. But he goes on to say also more than that. He also talks about meditating on God on his bed. Now, I think this is quite important, really. I don't know about you, but things often seem worse at 3 o'clock in the morning, quite often I wake up in the morning and wake up at 3 in the morning and everything seems, big, and the world seems to be darker somehow, and everything seems to be difficult, and so on and so on and so on. Often when I wake up in the morning, things seem better. And I wish I could develop the art of knowing God and meditate on God in the night. That often problems seem much bigger at 3 o'clock in the morning when you're on your own and you can't talk to anybody, and so on and so on and so on. But David here talks about how he meditates on God in the watches of the night, and God has helped him even at that time of night. And he goes on to say also that in the shadow of your wings I cling. In the shadow of your wings I sing for joy. Again, this lovely picture that we had in Psalm 61 as well, of like a mother hen puts her wings over her to protect her chicks. So God puts his wings of protection over us. Because of all that, he says, my soul clings to you, your right hand holds me. So try and see through this, the intimacy that David has with God, and just enjoy it. So from the beginning he says to God, you are my God, okay? And he goes on to say that he longs for God, like somebody in the desert longs for water, so he longs for God. That in the sanctuary, in the place of safety, he's reminded of God's power and God's glory. And then he talks, not only is God glorious and powerful, but also his steadfast love for David as well. And because that steadfast love is so important and so good, it's better, he says, than life itself. And because it's so wonderful, he blesses God with his lips and he praises God with his hands. That's a demonstration of real devotion to God here, of real praise to God. And he says it's so good here that he's satisfied like a rich feast. And he reminds also of the fact that even when lives are difficult, even at 3 o'clock in the morning when your problems often seem bigger, he's learnt the art of meditating on God and knowing God's love and God's protection in the middle of the night too. And because of that, he knows, a bit like a hen covers her wings over her to protect her young. So God puts his wings over us to protect us. And for all that, he says, my soul clings to you, your right hand holds me. That's where his strength is. And then in verses 9 to 11 he says, and by the way, can you sort my enemies out as well? Beautiful psalm, absolutely lovely. Just read it again, enjoy it at your leisure, and enjoy God's goodness, enjoy God's love, enjoy God's protection, behold God's power and God's glory. Thirst after God, feast on God, and cling to God, and you get the picture. And have a lovely day.